So I'm going to try my best to use the whiteboard. I'm not great at drawing, but we'll see what we can do here. Okay. So when you're talking about the heart, right, it's always good to know the blood flow through the heart. It's really going to help with everything as far as the blood vessels and, chapters on the immune system and everything else. So draw the heart. Hard to draw with this thing. All right, here's the heart. Right, on either side of the heart, I'm going to draw a triangle. Who can tell me what the triangles are?
Lungs.
Lungs, good. On either side of the heart, you have lungs, right? And we are talking about the flow of blood through the heart and to the lungs. The heart itself is made up of 4 chambers. So I'm going to divide the heart into 4 chambers. The 2 upper chambers are called atria, right? So this is the right atrium and left atrium. The 2 lower chambers are called ventricles. Right ventricle. And this is the left ventricle. So always make sure the first thing you need to know is that we're talking about anatomical position, right? We're talking about somebody looking at you. So make sure that you can tell right from left. That's a little bit confusing, right? But always think of it as somebody's looking at you. The heart is 4 chambers. The 2 upper chambers are called atrium, right? Each individual one is an atrium. Together they're atria. So you have a right atrium and a left atrium. The 2 lower chambers are ventricles. You have a right ventricle and a left ventricle. Now, when I draw through here, right, I'm going to use blue and red. When I use blue, I'm talking about blood that does not have oxygen bound to it. It's called deoxygenated blood, right? Blood without oxygen bound to it. When I use red, I am denoting, I'm showing blood that does have oxygen bound to it. Okay, I can start anywhere because this just will make a circle. I'll end up getting back to the beginning. I'm going to start in the right atrium. I'm going to start in the right atrium with blue, blue right here, the right atrium. From an atrium, blood always flows down to a ventricle. Okay, so it's blue, it doesn't have oxygen in it. Now, where does it need to go to get oxygen?
The lungs.
The lung. So when it leaves the right ventricle, it's going to go to the lungs. And once it leaves the right ventricle, it will branch, right? And you'll have one branch going to the right lung and one branch going to the left lung. In the lungs, a series of reactions happen, and you end up oxygenating the blood. The blood ends up binding to oxygen in the lungs. It then has to come back through the heart. So it goes from the lungs into the left atrium of the heart. And then from an atrium, it always flows down to a ventricle, right? And it leaves the left ventricle and it goes to the systems of the body. So it leaves the left ventricle and it goes head to toe, right? Bringing oxygen to all these muscles in your body. And then once it's given up the oxygen, it has to come back into the right atrium of the heart and start all over again. That was bad. Anyway, so through the right side of the heart, blood is always blue. It's always deoxygenated. There's never oxygen. Through the left side of the heart, blood is always red. It's always oxygenated. Okay, it's always going to go from the right side of the heart to the lungs to get oxygen. It's always going to go from the left side of the heart to the body to give oxygen to the body. Always, always, always. Now, what you should be able to do is not only draw those arrows, but name those blood vessels. Now, we'll see that some blood vessels are arteries and some are veins, right? The blood vessels that are arteries always carry blood away from the heart. So artery and away start with A. If you remember that, you'll never get it wrong. So leaving the right ventricle, we have a blood vessel going away from the heart. Is that an artery or a vein?
An artery.
An artery. So that is called a pulmonary artery. All right. And move that. So this is the pulmonary artery. It branches, right, to become the right pulmonary and the left pulmonary artery. Then we have two blood vessels that are coming back to the heart, and those arteries are veins.
Pulmonary veins.
The pulmonary veins, right? So no trick to naming them. Pulmonary has to do with the lungs, right? It has to do with respiration. We have pulmonary arteries going towards the lungs, away from the heart. We have pulmonary veins going back towards the heart. That's a pulmonary vein, and this is a pulmonary vein. All right. Pulmonary veins bring the blood back into the left atrium of the heart. It goes down to the left ventricle. It leaves the left ventricle through the biggest blood vessel in the body. Is it an artery or a vein? What do you think?
Okay, that's a artery.
It's an artery because it's going away from the heart. The biggest artery in the body is the aorta. Right, so this is the aorta down. The aorta branches into smaller and smaller arteries and brings blood everywhere, head to toe. Then that blood has to flow back into a big blood vessel to get back to the right atrium. And that blood vessel is a vein, right? And that vein is called the vena cava. This is the vena cava. The vena cava brings the blood back into the right atrium of the heart, and we start all over again. Right? So right atrium, right ventricle, pulmonary arteries to the lungs, pulmonary veins back to the left atrium, left ventricle, aorta, vena cava, back to the right atrium. In addition to this, there's one more thing that I want to add. In addition to this, we have valves. Okay. There are 4 sets of valves in the heart. There are atrioventricular valves. We just normally call them AV valve. And there are semilunar valves. Okay. So we have 2 atrioventricular valves, and from the name, you can tell that they're between the atria and the ventricle, right? We have one between the right atrium and the right ventricle, and one between the left atrium and the left ventricle. They prevent blood from flowing backwards. So once blood flows from the right atrium into the right ventricle, you only want it to keep going into that pulmonary artery. You don't want it to flow back to the right atrium.
It's regurgitation.
Right. So you want that valve to slap shut and prevent that backflow.
The only
Sometimes,
reason I know that is because I have that. I have a slight case of regurgitation in the pulmonary valve.
exactly. So sometimes what happens is the valve doesn't quite shut all the way, and some of the blood does go back. And sometimes, depending on how much blood is going back, it's, you know, it can be more serious than others. That's exactly what the valves are doing. They're trying to prevent blood from flowing backwards. So you have the right AV valve. And, maybe up here. Right AV valve. And you have a left AV valve. The left AV valve is called bicuspid. Right, the right AV valve is called, I don't know why I can't get back in there. The right AV valve is called the tricuspid. The left AV valve is called the bicuspid. So all that means, right, those things are named because the left AV valve has 2 flaps. The right AV valve has 3 flaps. That's it. So I'm going to draw on here. On the right side, I'm going to draw 3 lines. 1, 2, 3, because it's tricuspid. On the left side, I'm going to draw 2 lines because it's bicuspid. Okay. So all those valves are doing are preventing blood from flowing back into the atrium once it flows into the ventricle. Well, that's 2 of the valves. Those are the 2 atrioventricular valves. The other 2 valves are called semilunar valves. Semilunar valves are right where the ventricle meets an artery, and it's to prevent blood flow from the artery back into the ventricle. So there's one on the right side at the pulmonary artery. We'll circle here. Maybe. There we go. And there's one where the aorta leaves the left ventricle. Now, those are just called, they are just named for where they are. So this is the aortic valve. And this one over here is the pulmonary valve. Okay, so the pulmonary valve is right where the pulmonary artery leaves the right ventricle. And once blood flows from the right ventricle into the pulmonary artery, pulmonary valve shuts so that blood doesn't flow backwards. And the aortic valve is right where the aorta leaves the left ventricle. So once blood flows into the aortic valve slaps shut and blood doesn't flow back into the left ventricle. Now, if you can recreate this, right? If you can recreate the blue and the red, the blood flow, the 4 valves, the names of those 4 blood vessels, and you can get that straight in your head, right? You can get it straight in your head that blood flows right atrium, right ventricle, pulmonary artery, lungs, pulmonary veins, left atrium, left ventricle, aorta, vena cava. If you can keep that straight in your mind, you can do much better on this whole section, right? The blood vessels, the heart, the lymphatic system, which will be part of the immune system. All of that's going to make so much more sense once you can get this down. So my suggestion to you is to try to draw this a few times, either take a whiteboard, draw it, erase it, draw it, erase it, or, you know, take multiple pieces of paper and just keep trying to draw it out. Once you can get this blood flow down, everything starts to make a whole lot more sense. The rest of the chapters will make so much more sense. So I'm going to leave it at that. I'm going to let you guys kind of ruminate on that for a little while. And I'll save that horrible whiteboard drawing. I'll put that up on Moodle.
Not bad.
You know, if you guys can go through and do that. Now realize this is just right where the blood flow how the blood flow moves to the heart. This isn't the anatomical drawing of the heart, obviously. These aren't where the vessels look like they leave and enter, but they do leave and enter the heart into those chambers, right? They leave from the ventricles, they enter into the atria. And so I'm just trying to get you to understand how that blood flow works before we get into actual pictures of the biological heart. And then we're going to be able to do a dissection of the heart, and it'll make a lot more sense. You'll say, oh, that's, that has to be the aorta. It's leaving the left ventricle, and it'll become second nature to you. So my suggestion is to go ahead and do that, to keep trying to draw that before, try to do that a few times before Friday if you can. And we'll start going over the PowerPoint on the heart on Friday. Also, if you can, maybe this weekend or whatever, do the blood typing lab. It doesn't take long. The blood typing lab really only takes 5 or 10 minutes. Doesn't take long at all. It's just a matter of pricking your finger and getting a few drops of blood out. It only takes a minute or two to mix that with the samples on the card. So if you have any questions, definitely email me. Other than that, that's about all I want to say today.
Alrighty.
All right.
Alrighty. It's pretty interesting learning the heart.
I like it. It's one of my favorite sections to do. But it is a
actually
little bit
watched-
complicated,
I watched yesterday on a patient. They did an echocardiogram,
Mhm.
and I actually watched the regurgitation,
Yep.
and you could see the blue go back up and then the red.
Right.
And she had told me that, she goes, that is like the regurgitation.
Right.
Because we were talking, and I told her, I had an echocardiogram done, and I
Yep.
have a slight case of the regurgitation in the pulmonary valve.
Mhm.
And I have to go back every certain amount of time to make sure it doesn't get worse.
Right. Exactly.
But-
and
yeah.
they do that, right? They use the blue and the red dye, and they
Yeah.
and once you see it, you're like, oh, okay, well, that starts to make sense. Like that's
And you could see the
deoxygenated
valve.
blood going to the heart, going to the body, which is not a good thing.
Yeah, you could see about things opening and closing, and it was
Yep.
it was really, really neat. I wish
Yep.
I could have recorded it, and it was just really interesting to watch.
Cool.
So an echocardiogram is actually a good way to learn it too. I wonder if they have it on
On YouTube. That's a good
YouTube.
question.
because
Yeah,
that would
they
be a good
probably
thing to
do.
watch, because I thought it was quite interesting.
Okay. They
So-
probably do. Let me look for some and see if I can post some, and let me know if you find some. We can post them on Moodle for everybody to see. That might be helpful.
Yeah, and if they record them, I'm gonna see if I can get mine so I can watch it.
Cool.
But alrighty, and
All right.
you guys have a good day.
Thanks. You too.
That's it. We're not doing any more.
That's it.
Where are the guys?
Okay, have a good day.
All right.
Thank you.
All right, bye guys.
Take care.